Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Grow Your Path to Wellness. Last week, I stepped away, but Amanda, she hosted another returning guest, Heidi Gruss. Amanda and Heidi talked more in depth on ways to step into fear in order to move through powerful personal transformations. And I haven't had a chance to go back and listen to that one, and I need to because whenever I hosted Heidi, she was incredible. So I need to go back. And if you missed that, you can go back and watch that as well. This week, we are welcoming Kate Harold. We're going to dive into I kind of nutshelled this for us and said our multidimensional relationships with money. So we're going to break it down to different areas of life and how finances and money and just overall wellness all overlap. Kate has developed a platform on TikTok where she creates content on this topic, and we are excited to be her first podcast. So welcome, Kate. Thank you so much
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Kate, it's good to meet you for the first time. Usually when we have a guest from TikTok, I know them. So it's good to meet you. And now I need to go follow you because I haven't had a chance to do that already. Thank you so much for being here again. We appreciate your time anytime, but especially on a Sunday, a day of rest. We appreciate when our guests come to chat with us. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What's your background? And why this topic today?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kate, I live in Maine with my husband and our Chihuahua, and you might hear him. I've tried to keep him quiet. And I, like so many like Gen Z millennials, downloaded TikTok when the pandemic first started because I thought it was going to be 2 weeks. That was not the case, but actually gained a little bit of a following for just speaking openly about money. Especially as a woman in your 20s, I feel like I wasn't able to find a lot of outlets that were really shamelessly talking about money. So I've decided to kind of make my own and just tricks in the trade that I learned. And actually, I think kind of the first one that blew up for me was things I was too cheap to buy and how I saved $100,000 by 24, which I didn't. I had like maybe 200 followers at the time, and half of them were probably bots. But I think it just kind of goes to show like the interest that other young women have and people of color who have been traditionally excluded from these conversations. Like people want to know about money, people want to know how other people spend money. And so now, gosh, it's like almost 2 years later. It's been a great ride so far, and I have a day job. Well, actually, my last day was Friday. I had a day job in kind of venture capital and finance, and so that gave me a little bit more background. So just kind of wanted to share what I knew.
And when you said that like people were so interested in, this isn't like a talking point, but how people in their relationships with money, like it's so intriguing, and you hear different, and like, obviously so many factors. I could scroll off for days, different factors that go into what shapes our relationships with money. But I remember watching those and my husband was like, of course you follow her because you're cheap too. And I'm like,
yes.
but, everybody's how different him and I are. And I know we're going to get into like money and relationships in a little bit, but yeah, whenever I'm sure, as soon as you started making that content, everybody was like, finally, somebody.
I'm so nosy about other people's too. Where like maybe if I do it, I can learn about other people.
Yes, so much. So before we get into those like pretty specific talking points, I think maybe jump into more of a broad one and speaking from your perspective, how money relates to mental health, or at least how it has.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm an anxious person. I am a perfectionist person, so I've honestly had anxiety my whole life. And I think for me that is evident in the way that I save my money. And I think it can kind of go two ways on a spectrum, and I go the saver route, but for me it's like having money as stability, knowing that like if something anxiety inducing happened to me or some disaster happened to me, I would have this little nest egg to fall back on. And so I think that really drove, especially early off when I had no money and I was just starting out, like that was what I was working towards. Whereas I think, a lot of people can go the other direction and say, hey, this is a fleeting resource. I should just enjoy it now. Like the future gives me way too much anxiety to plan, so I can't think about it. And then kind of focusing more on that instant gratification. And I think it's not necessarily something that we talk about. And personally, I'm on kind of this ADHD journey of going through the process of getting a diagnosis for that. And two, that so many of the symptoms there can relate to money and how you spend money. And are you someone who just dives into a new hobby and then will throw $500 at it? And so I think, Amanda, is that you?
I'm late diagnosis ADHD club too.
Uh-huh.
So money for me, and we actually, the one other person who I will say is like amazing in this area, as far as like people I know and have encountered in my
Mm-hmm.
limited life, is Mary Bicknell, and we've done a couple episodes with her, and she is very much like, we have to talk about money. Like there is no talking about money. Like women, you have to get
Mm-hmm.
confident. I mean, I feel like I'm channeling my inner Mary Bicknell, but
Awesome.
but I remember when she came on, I was like, I like money stresses me out. Money gives me anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about budgeting numbers, like my brain just like shuts down, right? And it's so
Right.
much more than like it's so much more than like an ignorance or a lack of desire. It's like my brain can't, my executive functioning is like, nope, that's not interesting. It's
Don't like
boring.
it.
Bye-bye. Yep.
Yeah, and if it's never been explained, I feel like the way that money is explained is so often targeted at like white men. And if it's and even if you fall even a little bit like outside of the neurotypical kind of brain function, it's never been explained in a palatable way that could really make someone without that background or a different background understand it well. And how can I help people, who are in a very similar situation as me and didn't grow up. So my parents were both CPAs, so certified public accountants. So I grew up like this, and so that was such a privilege. If I didn't have that as my background, where would I have learned this? And looking back, there aren't a lot of places that someone could. So kind of being forced to not only rely on like the mental health of your parents and how that translates to the mental health of you, but then also kind of their financial habits and how that so strongly molds like the idea and the relationship that you have with money. So I think it's such a there's so many facets of that conversation because you're gonna have to battle through these relationships that maybe you saw growing up, both mentally and fiscally, and kind of what does that mean. So personally, I was so lucky to have a really like parents with really healthy relationship and a really healthy relationship with money. So it's more kind of my own anxiety playing through imposter syndrome and anxiety and will I ever be good enough to save a lot of money, or will I ever be able to retire? Will the world be on fire? That's another one. And that one I'm honestly not sure about. Um, but that's kind of like my personal relationship with money is battling that anxious sense for need for stability, but at the same time kind of this almost like compulsion to want to spend on something new, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think whether it's like ADHD or a trauma history or anxiety,
Mhm.
like this literally just happened yesterday. We went, Kate, you're in Maine, so I'm not sure if you know about this. Kelsey probably knows. Jungle Gyms is like this giant international market in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Brad yesterday that we needed to go. He's like in the living room, so he's probably gonna like hear me because I yell when I talk. But we literally talked about it yesterday.
Yeah, so my parents like talk up this place, and we had to go to Cincinnati
Mhm.
to see a friend anyway, and we're like, we're gonna stop by. And we get in there, and so a lot of the work I do mental health wise and as far as therapy is inner child work. And we
Mhm.
immediately walk in and there's like this toy section and just all sorts of toys. So like our inner child, we're just like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, this is awesome. And he finds something and he's like, oh, I want this one and I want this one. Oh, but then they have this one. And he's like racking them up in his hands. And then
Mhm.
he's like, okay, wait a minute. Hold on. They're this much each. And like, let me tell you, like the money part was not an issue. Like he
Mhm.
could have bought all of them without a problem. It was the guilt and the
Right.
should I be like the internal messages from childhood and not having like a strong financial upbringing, right? Like both of us
Mhm.
were raised by single parents. So
Mhm.
the relationship we knew with money was either we didn't really talk about money or we didn't have enough, right?
Right.
So that just the way that that narrative plays into your daily life. And then I'm sorry, Kelsey, I
Mhm.
think you were going to say something too.
Semi unrelated, but I was gonna say how much I like I aligned with you and like your relationship
Mhm.
with money, but then also I have to point out now that I like have you in the flesh, how grateful I am that you talk about your own privilege. and, you know, the oppression of, you know, minorities and things like that, and saying like, because you see so many people make content out there, and then is it palatable? Yes, but there's very clearly like nuances and things in there, and then other people are consuming this and they're like, why doesn't it look like this for me, or why can't I, you know, do it like that, you know? But thank you so much for like advertising.
I mean, it's, and I've faced some resistance in the past for just saying like, hey, if you're minimizing your accomplishments, and I think look at it as just telling the full story. Like, if I said that I crossed the ocean by myself, but I didn't tell you that I used a boat, like, it's not the full story. And so if I don't know, I think I would never want someone to look at the situation that I created for myself and say, why not me? And it's because I was born on third base, right? So if I hit a home run and I was born on third base, it's a little bit different. So I can only share things that helped me. And I still worked very hard, but I didn't face the problems and kind of the road bumps along the way that I would have faced, had I not been born into a privileged, like, both educationally and then emotionally healthy parent, like, family.
Yeah, that intersectionality is so important to talk about, and I appreciate that too, because regardless of the topic, regardless of your background, you have a platform out there, and I think everyone has a responsibility to educate themselves on that and speak on that, so that we're not leaving people feeling left out, feeling like they're internalizing, like you said, like, why can't I do that, or what's wrong with me, I can't do that, or like, that's so outside of what I could even remotely do that now I'm just depressed and beating myself up, and that's what I should be doing, right? That compare and despair. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get so upset when I see like other content creators in a similar space, like selling online courses, saying this is all you need, and it kind of just seems like, without acknowledging that, like, hey, I have a trust fund. Not that I do, but like in that case, and it's like that. It just seems to me like they are being able to manipulate these people who want to be in a similar situation so bad and profiting off of it. And I don't know. I think that's like within the content creator space, especially with women in finance. That's like my one thing where I'm like, we cannot do this anymore.
Okay, so I kind of started to allude to it when I was talking about my husband, but
Yeah.
how do you see the interaction, or what do you have to say about that with as far as money and like intimate or romantic relationships?
Yeah. So I've been married 8 months, so I cannot give marriage advice at this point. But my husband and I had been together kind of on and off for 9 years before we got married, and so I grew up with him, for a lack of a better term. Like, we both went to the same high school, and so we've kind of always known each other's habits to a certain extent. And honestly, both in high school, we took the same class, a personal finance class. And looking back, like, I don't think a lot of schools have it, but we like learned budgeting and alluded to like how you'll need to save for retirement. And we both, like, 10 years later, attribute a lot of our like success to learning those skills. And um, but we've always both kind of been savers, especially as we grew up and graduated college. So I got so lucky where we're both on a very similar page. And I think, we have never, I think the most important thing is we've never used money as something that we like use in fights. Like, it's never been like, oh, well, you spent on this or you spent on that. Like, it is merely a means to an end. Like, we need to buy food, we use money. And it's never something we've held over each other. It's never been something we fight over. And I think just really, like, before we got married, sitting down and laying out, like, here are our plans for the future. Here is how we like to spend money. What is the amount of money that we think we should consult the other person before we spend? And we actually used YNAB at the time. So it's SAP, you need a budget. And so all of our finances go to one spot. And not that we're in there, checking like, oh, why did he spend, $12 at Chipotle? But it's able to give us a full holistic picture and and hold us accountable to each other, but then also to ourselves. I'm like, is this something that's helping us like as a family financially or not? So we've always been really open about it. Like, it was never taboo to say, how much are you making? Or even before we got married, like, how much money do you have? Or do you have debt? Or what's your credit score like? Like, and honestly, like being together so young, we went through a lot of those like new chapters together and establishing all of that together. So it wasn't like we met at 30 and he had this whole financial past. And so I think like we just try to be really open with it and just like attach no moral value to it. Like it is just a thing that we go to work and we make. And we're lucky where we make very similar amounts. So it isn't, we don't have a kind of the relationship where someone makes significantly more and kind of takes a provider role. We approach it as like a true partnership. It's like we are both out working to bring in money to benefit our family. And so that, we just look at it as like a true partnership. And I think having witnessed, relationships that maybe were really strongly affected by their relationships with money, trying to be really proactive on taking care of the way that we view money. It's the most common reason people divorce. And I was always curious, kind of, why is that?
Yes. And my brain like latched onto, I love that you have that framework of like, it doesn't have moral character, value. It's, I teach that. I do a lot of, intuitive relationships or neutrality around body and food in my clinical work. So I literally seen this kind of come and like be the lens that you're describing how you and your husband view money. Like this is a commodity, that we use exchange for survival.
Right. Right. And we're both like fairly plain people. Like we don't own luxury items. Like we're just not, like we're from the Midwest. We don't care as much. Like, so we've never been like huge spenders, like, oh, I want this really fancy bag or I want to drive this fancy car. Like we're very, very content kind of living at that same level of comfort for us. Like to us, like a great life looks very similar. And so I think that's great. Like not one of us is striving for a significantly different level of living than the other. And we make those large decisions together. And I think once we got engaged in a little bit before, just kind of approaching everything is like, how are we going to handle this? Or when looking at new jobs, like, is this good for us versus like, is this good for me? And I think that helps. But I mean, I've been married 8 months, so I can't speak to the volumes of of marriage and money. Yeah, but that's, we're just trying to be open about it. And I think too, like with coming from the Midwest, and I'm sure this is very similar everywhere, like not people didn't really talk about money. So like we didn't know how other like couples handle their finances. So now we're kind of asking our friends like, what do you guys do? Like just out of one curiosity, but two, like there isn't, like we were never taught like here's how you should do it. Like I asked my parents how they split money, and you just kind of have to make your own way. It seemed like you don't really have this manual to go off of.
I feel like if I look back at my own, upbringing, my mom, we self-disclosure, like had me when she got pregnant when she was 15, had me at 16. And it was like, and then evolutionary, as I aged, my families had developed new relationships. And I feel like in my family, money was only talked about if it was out of anger. And now for me, it's like, I obviously I have, break that cycle and all of those things. But it's like, yeah, if it was talked about, it was very, very unpleasantly or unhelpfully emotionally charged.
Right. Which like, how do you unlearn that as you grow up? It's so hard.
Yeah, and there's a couple things. So kudos to wherever you went to school. Because I always give grace to people as far as our mental health, like all the things that we're taught in school, like algebra and chemistry, and I don't even remember any of the things I was taught, but like there's no emotional regulation, there's no stress management, there's no effective communication, and there's no budgeting, finance. I mean, apparently there is some places, but I didn't have that, and I don't know anyone that did, unless they went to like a private school or a more elite, quote unquote, school where that was focused on, but so kudos to your school for that, but I usually validate for people. And then we don't have that information. We don't know what we don't know. We have our own mental health things. We have our own adverse childhood experiences. We have our own intimate relationship, narratives we've created. And then here comes this thing of money, and it becomes a tool that we can use against each other, unfortunately, because we don't know how to manage our emotions. We don't know how to effectively communicate, right? And so it becomes this it becomes, like I said, like a tool to be able to use against each other because you don't have any other frame of reference.
Right, absolutely. And if you don't set ground rules, like my husband and I, we don't raise our voice at each other. We don't ever call each other names, and we don't ever fight about money. Like we have these like ground rules to help. Like these are things that are off limits. If we're bickering, these do not ever. And I think, that can prevent like further escalation. But it's like if you don't sit down with your partner and establish like, here's the page I'm on, where are you? Like, are we in the same chapter at all? And like, how do we even like move our life forward together, especially if one's a saver and one's a spender? Like, I think it's so important, especially like prior to getting into a serious relationship or marriage, even like sitting down and examining that, just as like you talk about, do you want kids or not? Like it is such in a holistic picture of what your life is going to look like. It is such an important thing, not necessarily that like you need to have a lot of money, but you need to agree on how you're going to spend that limited resource that you do have.
It's like in my own work, and I know, man, we both do a lot of this, and but I feel like it falls into a very broad and, like you said, important conversation about values, like core values.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, about the time I start talking, I get a tickle in my throat. But what do those look like for each of us? And how do we kind of, coexist, not just like but like in a loving,
Mm-hmm.
functional, serving way,
Mm-hmm.
and mutual respect.
Mm-hmm.
We raise voices as soon as we, start yelling, calling names.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, goodness gracious. We lose respect. I'm going to drink.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to show up to
Well,
that.
it's like some level of like, there's like, here's me with my little inner child, but like our little inner child is like, I don't know, that's scary. I don't want to talk about that. No
Right.
one ever talked about that. Or when that was talked about, they were fighting. So
Mm-hmm.
like, no, let's not talk about it. Or this is how I'm going to yell at you about it because that's what I was modeled with, right? So it's, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, Kels.
Yeah. And okay, another talking point, and I was excited for this one, was might have to have Amanda ask you if I can't stop coughing. Any benefits and tips, like as a young person, that you have came across in your journey, or
Right.
that you would like to pass on to people as far as retirement planning, kind of planning for retirement young?
Yeah, so I'm like the kind of like the old person within my friend group. I'm like, did you guys set up your Roth IRAs? I think they're like, please be quiet. Um, so I read The Defining Decade when I graduated college, and I graduated college 1 year early. So all my friends were finishing their senior years. And so I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing in adulthood in general, especially with kind of retirement savings. My parents had kind of given me some tips on like, hey, like obviously do at least your employer match in whatever program they're sponsoring. And mine did a 401k and set up that Roth IRA. But then from there, it was kind of like, well, what does that mean? Like, where do I invest it? What does that look like? And so I started out making a very average salary, and kind of as my career has progressed, what I've done, and this is, I guess, a general savings tip for that can kind of funnel into retirement, is I've never adjusted the amount that goes into my checking account. So when I was making like a third of what I do now, I was living off of that same amount in my checking account. So every time I got a raise, I was able to go into kind of like our employee resource site and just allocate that to a high yield savings account. So my checking account, what I lived off, never changed. And so then able to like just send that money directly either into my Roth. So, when it was $6,000 a year, just putting $500 a month that I never saw. And so I never had the need to spend. But I think just in general, like the earlier you can start, the better. Even starting at 21 versus 31 can double the money that you're saving. So even if it's just a little bit, I know everyone comes from different experiences, and they might be supporting other family members or paying off student loans. Like everyone's situation is very different. But if that's something, especially just when you're young, you can really focus on, um, then you don't have to focus on later. Like you'll never be able to play catch up. And my uncle once told me, and for some reason it stuck with me, like future you will not care that you bought that t-shirt that's now out of style. But like future you will thank you for putting $100 in like your Roth. And so I try to live like that. Like if I can look at this as a self-care like way to help future me, absolutely. But I would definitely say like start as early as you can, even if it's just a little bit. Obviously, if you're able to, and your employer, let's say, matches 3%, put at least 3% in whatever employer-sponsored plan that is. And then try not to give too much into kind of like your cost of living inflation, or what should I say, like your lifestyle inflation. Like if you become accustomed to nicer things, then that's going to cost more. So as you're making more money, and if you're able to kind of move up that ladder, really be strategic in how you're continuing to allocate your paycheck. I had all of like my 401k stuff taken out before I ever saw my paycheck. So I never saw like the full amount of what it should be, and I was just used to that, and I think that was so helpful. But I read the book The Automatic Millionaire too, which I would like recommend if you have no idea kind of where you're starting out, you're young and you know, maybe have never even talked about money or retirement savings. It lays it out really easily. So like that, I should honestly it's not sponsored, but if they ever want to, like The Automatic Millionaire and The Defining Decade are two books that I think really made my 20s like significantly easier, because I could kind of just set up this plan, set it and forget it, and just go on with my life.
Kelsi and I are rapid. So Kelsi and I share a Google Doc for podcasts, for anybody that doesn't know that, like to keep our talking points. And we are rapid fire, like both of us at the same time. We're adding bullets and we're like, the automatic LOL. And then you said the next one, and then we're like,
check them out after. She's probably like, they're literally texting while they're talking.
No, yeah. And also talk to your friends about what they make.
So listen, like
coworkers.
I have to say that it is. So my mom kind of gave me similar tips. Like her very first one was like, hey, you need to establish credit. So like when you start getting all these offers at 18, like just pick one and only use it for gas and pay it off every month. That way you can build up credit. Or whenever you have the opportunity, if you have an employer that matches literally, even if it's $25 a pay, like just put something in there, right? And that's fantastic. But I do want to make sure that we address like, what about the folks that are just trying to get by? Like, what about the folks that are working in places where they're not going to have an opportunity to have a 401k where the employer matches? Like, do you have any tips for those folks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple different paths you can take it. And having the privilege of never being in that situation, so just kind of really hypothetically, looking at long-term career growth, like is the spot that you're currently in a spot that like you see yourself in the rest of your life, or are you kind of pursuing education to maybe work somewhere with a 401k? Although some people like want to work in industries where that's just not standard, or kind of work for themselves or have be 1099s, and so that's totally different. But if you are a 1099 or you don't have this employer sponsored savings plan, you can look at like an IRA option. A Roth IRA is really nice because it's not tied to any employer. And I believe it was $6,000 last year. I think it might go up to $6,500 this year. But in terms of people just getting by, I would just kind of say like, even if you can look at that budget like really carefully, and I don't think budget should be restrictive necessarily, but it's empowering to know where your money goes. And look like, is all of this money allocated like how the best it should be? Like, is there anything that I'm looking at kind of at the end of the month, like kind of like, I maybe shouldn't have done that. And in the future, could I allocate that money, even if it's legitimately $20 a month that just automatically goes into a different savings account? Or am I able to just look ahead to pursue things that could be more profitable down the road? And you know, that's really not a possibility for everyone, but I think just looking in really small and minuscule actions that you can take that will down the road kind of have this larger effect. So even putting $20 a week away now, like 50 years down the road, that's going to be a significant amount of money. And I know people are struggling to get by and we're facing inflation. So, you know, if even if you can just invest a little bit, and I choose kind of mutual funds. I'm more of a conservative investor myself and not in a place to give financial advice, but just even putting a little bit in there, I think can make a really big difference, and kind of taking a very long view and kind of a very delayed gratification type view on what can I do now, even if it's extremely small and I'm struggling to do it, that could make a significant payoff later.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I like your frame of reference, or like your perception of a budget, because I feel like just as soon as we hear the word budget, like it can stir up so many, like
right.
nope, we don't do that. I don't do that. Every time we do that, people are like borderline flipping tables. Like we're not. No. Or it's just scary. It's intimidating. Like, and to get a grasp on, like, I like how obviously not everybody's in our positions, all of us. And it's like, what's the bottom line that I need to live? And then move from there to what things do I not necessarily need to live, but I, it's a perk or something extra. But I love, like, focusing on where your money's going and what's the bottom line. And if I'm simply just making it or barely making it on my bottom line of I'm making in order to survive,
right.
That's okay, and not guilting and shaming ourselves. And there is a moment maybe you do get some kind of holiday bonus or something. Because I feel like I'm all over the place, but in my area, I'm like Midwest. We're in Ohio, but I'm very like southeastern, rural, a lot of poverty. So as soon as people get what is perceived as money, like real money, you hear people call it, it's like, all right, you're programmed to be like, okay, what can I buy for myself? Because I can never use that.
Right.
And it's like, how can I, put, like we said, $50 out of an income tax return or a holiday bonus into something that will take care of your future long-term self? Because not many people in my own family or in my neighborhood probably have a retirement account. It's like we're banking on Social Security and that's about it. So it's like, every little bit helps. Don't guilt yourself and think about your long-term self, even if you are just surviving right now.
Right. And ask for help too. And I think it can be hard to determine like where you can get that help, especially like depending on the situation that you grew up in. But I think taking the stigma and the shame of money, like we aren't born knowing how to handle money. That's not instinctual. Like, where are you going to learn it? And if you don't know how, and that really is a stressor for you and you're nervous, like seek help. And whether that is like kind of doing your own research online or and try and vet it very, like, there are a lot of people that will try and take advantage of you, and so it can be really hard to say, hey, where can I get financial resources and where can I get information? But it's okay not to know, like, where do people learn and how can we help them learn, and where can you provide a platform or a place where you can talk openly and without stigma, because there's no reason to. And other cultures will use kind of a different tense when they're talking about money. So like a different tense of words and like speaking of it more futuristically, like they're saving more futurely. Well, where we tend to focus very specifically on the now and kind of that instant gratification. And I think just dissecting too from like a really wide anthropological like view, why is that and how our culture is looking so differently at money. So I think definitely just being very open about it. Talk with your friends about how much like they make, if they're comfortable sharing, and even if you want to know like what your coworkers make. And I think traditionally like women and people of color are people who benefit from these conversations, and traditionally people in power have not reflected that, and so they're hesitant to have those conversations. But I think it only can help other people if you're really open and saying, hey, like I'm here for you, I'm happy to be a resource, I'm happy to bounce ideas off of. Like, I don't have all the answers, I still don't know. Like, I think every adult is faking it. Like, none of us know what's actually going on. But kind of like, we're in this together, we're gonna figure this out together. Like, we're not probably going to do it perfectly, but even again, like if we're just doing little things to help future us, I think that makes all the difference.
I really appreciate you saying that perspective, because it makes me think, so there's this, I'm pretty sure it's nationwide, training program, words are hard for me at the moment, but it's called Bridges Out of Poverty. And I went through the whole training, and then I ended up like continuing and like purposefully befriending someone that was in poverty and working on getting out of poverty to help them, like, with some of the mindsets and things that I had been taught being lower middle class, but not that far from, right? But like a lot of that taught like how, different concepts as far as money or the way we communicate, but money was one of them. And it was like, for those in wealth, money is something that you put away and it goes to trust funds for your kids, right?
Right.
And then middle class is like, all right, we're gonna save a little bit, but we're also gonna spend, right? We're gonna like have nice things now. And poverty is like, if I don't spend this right now, I'm gonna it's gonna get taken away from me, right? Like whether that's outstanding bills or I'm gonna get robbed or like, right, I don't ever have this concept of money, like Kelsi was saying. So I think that's really important to view, like, wait, given the way I was brought up, that makes sense that that's how I
Right.
me, but how do I get to a different thought process about it?
Or
And
the
then
scarcity mindset.
yeah, scarcity mindset, absolutely, yeah. And then the other thing that came to mind is how simple it was for me, because the way my brain works, when my employer was like, hey, fill out this thing. How much money do you want to come out of your account? Boom. Okay, done. And they just, like you said, they just automatically put it there. Then I was like, bye, employers. I'm going to go work for myself. And I don't know how many years later, but I have yet to, because it gives me anxiety and stresses me out every time I go to log in to where my money is, and I can't like, oh my God, now I got to call someone and I got to figure out, how do I contribute? Where does the money come from? How do I get it there? That like, I don't know how many years later, I'm still just like, well, I have that little nest egg from when someone was helping me with it. So just to validate for people, like it, even for somebody that was consistently doing that early on, it's a challenge. You have to learn to come up with your own systems and right. Yeah.
And I think everyone kind of has their own equivalent, whether it's money or not. Like I really struggle to make appointments, like the dentist, like very simple things for me, like give me that anxiety of like, oh my God, I can't do it. Where it's like, oh, I'm happy to like do very financially like complex things, but like everyone has those like little things that give them anxiety. And I think for a lot of people, it is money. So how can we together overcome it, or give people platforms or situations that diffuse some of that anxiety and make it a lot easier, especially for people who are doing this for their first time, often alone.
Yeah. And I appreciate your cautionary warning of people being predatory, because what do we know about places of poverty, impoverished areas? There's payday loan places on every corner, and people, convincing you that they can make you money or get money, or we can, buy your house fast, or whatever that looks like. So like you said, vetting your resources, but there are so many valuable content creators, free resources, your library, in your community, depending on how resource rich it is, as far as social services, there's a lot of social service agencies that offer financial literacy courses, budgeting, those kind of things, like your urban leagues. And now I'm like going into social work mode, but there are options out there where they won't be predatory. And you can find those resources in your community.
Absolutely. And I think too, just like, is this someone that's making money off of me not knowing? Like this, and if it sounds too good to be true, it is. Absolutely. Like there is no way to cheat the system. Like I feel like everyone's trying to advertise like, oh, make money really quick, or like overall in the whole scheme of your life, like there is really not a way to cheat the system. So just like put a little away. But it's so hard to know. How would you know?
I feel like the avenues to go where like you get legitimate, vetted, reliable, valid support are like perceived as the most complex or the most intimidating. Like I remember whenever I became self-employed, and if it weren't for my grandparents and like a handful of people in my life, that was so anxiety provoking for me too. Like it was my very beginning of TikTok, and I made like a series about it. So intimidating to like find a financial advice. Just the words sound intimidating. I was like, and then people are talking to you about terminology that you don't know, and I feel like it's left so intimidating and complex on purpose.
Oh, absolutely. Like they're using jargon because they know you don't understand it.
Yes. Just like nutrition labels on food, or they're all kind of
legal contracts. You're like, what are you even saying to me? I don't know what I'm signing, but okay. And if I can't understand that, like somebody that has less education opportunity than I is like just signing their life away. Yeah. We could go off on a tangent about all of these.
So many things that I feel like are set up to keep people kind of stuck, oppressed, and that sounds awful. I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but I feel like it's a thing. And if you don't have those connections, or if you're not allowing yourself to, educate yourself, but also reach out for that support. And I think in my town, there was one little tiny office with like one financial advisor who's there is at that office for like 2 days a week. So it's like, Where do
What
I
do I
go?
do?
What do I
And
do?
then everyone that you're surrounded with has the same scarcity mindset, tyranny of the moment, spend the money right now. We don't know what else to do with it. We don't know how to save. So it's like, yeah. Oh, this was so good. Can we have you back again? But can we make this a every time we have someone, I'm like, can you just like keep coming back and talking about this conversation? I think
gosh,
Kate
of
needs to
course.
write her own book. Like,
No,
Yeah.
I would never be able to like actually sit down and focus and do it.
I
I just like
podcast. Well, you have your TikTok, so there's that.
it's good because I can do that in like 1 minute. I'm like
Yeah.
that, focus on that, done. Okay, like because I'm all over the place, which is really great for some things. Like I'm really interested in certain things, but it's like okay, here's like my 1 minute of really focused thoughts, and then it's like okay, I'm like looking outside now.
Okay, I can
Or,
squirrel off now. I did it. I did a thing. Success.
Right.
Oh, Kate, thank you so much for being here. I'm glad we met. I will need to follow you. So where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, okay. I got married last year. I'm changing my name, so my platforms are really. I'm working on it, but I'm on Instagram at Kate Watry or LinkedIn, TikTok. I'll kind of link from there.
Okay. And any last minute pieces of advice, a mantra, anything to sum up to leave with our guests today or our audience today?
I would just say like be really kind to yourself and like give yourself a lot of grace, especially in the money situation. Like the economy is crazy, like inflation is nuts, it's confusing, university costs way too much. Like we're going through it. Healthcare is absurd. Like if it is too much for you, that's okay. Like that's fine. Like give yourself some grace on that. It's not going to feel like it makes sense for a while, but just take little steps. Because my dad always said like life is full of 1,000 little choices. Like you're never going to do one big thing. You're going to do 1,000 little things. So just try and make good choices and like financially sound choices, but it's okay. And everything's reversible other than a child. You can't hand them back usually, but like if you don't like where you're at, like try and change it. You can move anywhere, you can do anything. Don't care what other people think, but that's kind of like me getting on like my old man soapbox of like, well, when I was young, but
Yeah. No, yeah. Let me go downstairs and grab my 6-month-old and be like, you know what? Let's just get back. Let's just
you're a lot right now.
Yeah, I appreciate that too, of like the grace, because we talk about that all the time. Like the world is cray, y'all. The world, like you said at the beginning, is the world going to be on fire? I don't know. Is it already? And we're just
Potentially,
like,
honestly.
yeah, are we just like, oh, it's kind of warm in here?
Yeah. I love when you said like none of us. I don't care how much you look like you know everything on the outside. We don't.
I say that to my clients all the time. I'm like, we are all children running around in adult bodies, pretending like we know what we're doing and that we're adults, but nobody knows. Nobody knows.
And anytime you think you know, just do your taxes, and then you'll be like, I for sure don't know. Like, that's a humbling experience. If you want to, like, you're ever feeling like you have it two together, do your taxes.
Yep.
Amen. Oh, thank you so much.
We appreciate you being here, Kate.
Thank
Thank you. You're
so much
welcome
for
to come back
having me.
anytime, because this is, again, such an important topic, but it's so important that people, like women, minorities, people of color are talking about this topic, because otherwise, you know, like all the I know I'm squirreling off as I'm trying to wrap up, but like all the CPAs I know around me, all the financial offices, like it is old white men. And so how can I, like, even if I had the, like, if I had the resources to go pay someone to do that kind of thing, you're not relatable.
I mean, the system is made by a certain type of people and it will traditionally continue to benefit those exact same people. So unless like we figure out a way to like, really make ourselves have a strong seat at the table, like that cycle will just continue. So anytime that we can interject ourselves or put ourselves into a situation that traditionally we weren't a part of, I think is huge.
Yeah. And people that have the resources to seek out like paid for financial advice, I highly recommend like finding a woman, finding someone of color, like
there is
yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you again. I'm sorry if I keep continuing it because I just want to keep chatting all morning. Next week, make sure you tune in. We are going to be welcoming, and we haven't had a chance to confirm how to pronounce her name, so I want to apologize in advance if I say it wrong. I think it's Rika Chaudhry. She has a lot of experience in integrated care, which is like super close to my heart. So I'm really excited to talk about that. We're still nailing down and finalizing the topic. Make sure you hit the little notification button, give us any comments or feedback, and we are happy to communicate those to Kate, or if you have any questions about the episode. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.